following the resignation of two key ministers, Sajid, Javid and Rishi Sunak, from the UK government's cabinet. Boris Johnson once again finds himself in a tenuous position, scrambling to remain in control. To discuss this and the latest out of the UK, I'm delighted to be joined here live from London by Alexander Downer. Alexander, great to see you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks very much. Yep, very well.
Okay, Alexander, you got your finger on the pulse. Can Boris Johnson survive? Talk us through exactly what's happened over the last 24 hours and then give us your insights into what is going to happen.
Well, this goes to yet another sort of relatively minor scandal involving a government deputy whip called Chris Pincher, who has allegedly been sexually interfering with men in a London club last week, and so had to resign and was expelled from the Conservative Party. But the issue became, why did Boris Johnson appoint him as a deputy whip in the first place if he knew about these, a pattern of this sort of behaviour by Pincher? And as it turned out, first of all, number 10, that is the Prime Minister's office, denied that he knew anything about this pattern of behaviour. And then it was revealed that actually he did know about this pattern of behaviour. So that's all rather a complicated story, and you'd wonder why that was so important, but it just comes on top of so many other problems in relation to what's called Partygate, the breaching of the lockdown rules by Johnson and the staff at number 10 and so on, and denials that didn't stand up. There's a perception of dishonesty on the part of Boris Johnson. So I must admit, I did think MPs would feel, at least Conservative MPs would feel this was just too much. And so the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's the equivalent of the Treasurer, he resigned last night, and so did the Health Minister. And these are key people in the government. So it does look now as though through one means or another, Boris Johnson will be overthrown. It's very hard to see him surviving all of this.
So, Alexander, Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid, they're both pretty heavy hitters. They're two key, I think Sajid Javid is regarded as one of the kind of conservative leaders of the once Conservative Party. Do you think, is this a coordinated attempt to get themselves into the leadership position, or do you believe they're kind of protestations of it's all a question of principle and we've had enough and we can't tolerate this sort of nonsense any longer? Where does the future lie?
So those two, Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid, they are both what you might call, when I say conservative, they are both what you might call Thatcherites. So they're economic dries. Whereas
person after my own heart, Alexander, you're singing my language. Carry on. We're looking good.
So Boris Johnson is not. Boris Johnson is one of those. Very difficult to be a president or a prime minister and be economically illiterate, but he gives all the impression of being economically illiterate. And when demands are made for spending, well, he just wants to spend the money. He doesn't ever explain the economics of spending too much money. And I think, to be honest with you, those two, Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid, had just had enough of this. That wasn't the only issue. What I sort of laboriously described as the scandal involving this MP who had to resign, that was a trigger in terms of their perception of Boris Johnson's personal behaviour and values, but they have been very unhappy with the general economic direction of the government, spending too much money. Spending of the money has created inflation. Boris Johnson has also been increasing taxes against the objection of his treasurer. So, I mean, I think it was just enough is enough. I don't think, I mean, both of them would be potentially leadership candidates. I think Rishi Sunak could turn out to be the one who becomes the next Prime Minister. But I don't think that's what motivated them. I think it's a bigger motive than that.
And Alexander, just before you go, do you think net zero or Boris Johnson's kind of heavy leaning into greener ideology played a role? Because you've had energy crisis in Britain, spiralling electricity prices. Was that a factor at all?
Spiralling energy prices is obviously a huge negative for an incumbent government, including the current British government. There's no doubt about that. I think the public would imagine that that is largely a consequence of the Ukraine war, although just for what it's worth, something like 40% of the price of gas in the UK is as a result of green taxes. So there's been some lobbying to reduce the green taxes, but the mood in the UK is very much one, though, of the sort of zeitgeist of the UK is that the country needs to do as much as it can on climate change. So climate change is not such a big issue within the party.
Fascinating. Alexander Downer, always great to chat to you. Thanks so much for coming on the Bolt Report this evening, and enjoy whatever is happening in the next few days there in London. I'm sure it will be absolutely fascinating.